We now move on to the types of errors. When an individual recites the glorious Quran, like when he engages in himself in any other task, he can make mistakes, he can make errors. So whilst reciting the glorious Quran, there are a variety of mistakes an individual can find himself in. All the mistakes an individual can make whilst reciting the glorious Quran, it is necessary for an individual to abstain from them. It's necessary for an individual to save himself from them. Very soon we're going to go into the two different types of errors. Number one, major. Number two, minor. Before we go into the two types, we need to understand a very, very important concept. And this concept I'm about to mention is taken from certain companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In this day and age, we divide the disobedience of Allah Ta'ala into two types. We say this is a major disobedience and this is a minor disobedience. This is a major sin and this is a minor sin. No. كُلُّ مَا نَهَى اللَّهُ عَنْهُ فَهُوَ كَبِيرٌ. Every prohibition of Allah Ta'ala, it's necessary for us to abstain from it. Why? Engaging within it is major. The companions were close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They'd taken the piety and taqwa directly from the heart of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And due to having that relationship, due to having that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they would never differentiate between major and minor. Everything was major for them. However, due to us lacking in our connection, in our relationship with Allah Ta'ala, we now find the need that let's divide into major and minor. Zayd is walking down the road with Fatima. Zayd has got immense love for Fatima. Fatima has got immense love for Zayd. Now Zayd will not say that I will not trip up my wife. Why? Because he's got immense love for her. Nor will he ever think about nudging his wife in such a manner. Why? Because he's got immense love for her. And if any of the two do happen, whether it's the tripping up or it's the nudge in such a manner, he will feel really remorseful. Why? Because the action he is engaged in, the act he has committed is such that due to his relationship with his wife being so great, it's more than possible it becomes a hindrance. And he cannot afford to have such hindrances in his relationship between himself and Fatima. However, an individual who hasn't got such a relationship with his wife, yes, he'll be particular that he doesn't become the means of her falling over. But it's more than possible he nudges her in such a manner here and there, and when his wife says, what are you doing? He will say, that's mine, it's not even major, it's not even an issue. We need to have the first type of connection with Allah Ta'ala, that كُلُّ مَا نَهَى اللَّهُ عَنْهُ فَهُوَ كَبِيرٌ. Everything is major. There is no concept of minor and major. Once it comes to snakes, we don't differentiate between big and small. If a small snake comes into the room, we won't hug it. In a similar manner, we shouldn't open the doors for the disobedience of Allah Ta'ala just by saying that it's a minor disobedience of Allah Ta'ala. Anyway, we diverted a little, let's come back. So whilst reciting the glorious Quran, in reality, every mistake is major. There is no minor mistake. Why? If we go to talk to the queen, we go to talk to a person with a high caliber in the world, will we differentiate between major and minor mistakes whilst conversing with that individual? No. We'll say that the individual is so great, we can't afford to differentiate between minor and major. This communication should be perfect. Allah Ta'ala, like I mentioned, is the leader of all leaders. Allah Ta'ala is the real leader. When we communicate with Allah Ta'ala whilst reciting the glorious Quran, we cannot afford to say this is a major mistake, this is a minor mistake. Why? Everything in this regard is major. However, once two mistakes are compared to each other, That's when one in reality becomes major, one becomes minor in comparison to the one it is being compared with. I've got a cup, someone's put me some water in. I'll never say this is a big cup or this is a small cup. Why? Because we've got one cup. A cup is a cup. But once someone else puts a cup next to that which is bigger in size in comparison to the one I initially had, I'll say the one I initially had is small in comparison to the bigger one which is now being put besides it. In a similar manner, every mistake whilst reciting the glorious Quran is a major mistake. However, once we compare one with another, then we say that this is minor in comparison to that which is major, and that is major in comparison to the other which is minor. So all these mistakes a person can make whilst reciting the glorious Quran, they have been divided into two. Number one, major mistakes, al-lahnul jali. And number two, minor mistakes, al-lahnul khafi. There's also a third type I usually like to mention, which is al-akhfa. However, I don't want to go into that detail. Let's just understand the major concepts and the major points within the theory. Number one, major mistakes. Number two, we have minor mistakes. The question is, what constitutes a major mistake and what constitutes a minor mistake? The answer: there are 5 things which constitute a major mistake. 5 things constitute a major mistake. So if any individual engages in any of these 5 types of mistakes whilst reciting the glorious Quran, his error, his mistake will be known as al-jali, a major mistake. Number 1, changing a letter. Changing a letter. So within a word, whilst reciting the glorious Quran, we have a letter. However, in place of that, we pronounce another letter. This is a major mistake. We may be thinking, hold on, in other languages, by changing one letter within a word, there usually isn't such a big deal about it. Why is this termed as a major mistake whilst reciting the glorious Quran? The answer is that in the Arabic language, never mind by changing one letter to another, it makes a major difference in the meaning. Even by changing one diacritical point to another, if intentionally done, can be the means of one depriving himself of Iman. For those who are learned, we all know وَإِذِ ابْتَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ رَبُّهُ وَإِذِ ابْتَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ رَبُّهُ. The meme of Ibrahim has a fatha above it. The ba of Rabbuhu has a dhamma above it. The translation is, and when his Lord, i.e. Allah Ta'ala, assessed Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam, tested Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam, if an individual was to change the diacritical points within this, upon the meme of the Ibrahim he was to put a dhamma, and upon the ba of Rabbu he was to put a fatha. Then the meaning would become, remember the time when Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, na'udhu billah, assessed and tested his Lord. So we're talking about the changing of a letter. This is major. Let's take an example. In the Arabic language we have the word qalbun with a qaf. Qalbun with a qaf. If an individual replaces this qaf with a kaf, he says qalbun in place of qalbun, it has a major impact upon the meaning. Qalbun means heart, whereas qalbun with a kaf in the place of a qaf means a dog. Number 2, adding a letter. For example, we've got 3 letters in a word. The last diacritical point upon the last letter of the word we stretch and we add a letter. This is also a major mistake. For example, we got yuhibbu, yuhibbu. Someone adds another letter at the end, a waw, he says yuhibbu, yuhibbu. The third type of a major mistake is omitting a letter. In other words, when an individual recites a word from the glorious Quran, he omits a letter whilst reciting it. We can take an example. Within the glorious Quran, we find the word yas'alunak. It appears many a times. Yas'alunak. Between the waw and the kaf, we have the particle, we have the letter noon. If an individual was to omit that and recite yas'aluk, this will also be termed as a major mistake. Why? Because he is omitting a letter of the glorious Quran. The fourth type is when an individual changes a harakah. When an individual changes a harakah. Before I go into giving an example in this regard, we need to familiarize ourselves with what this term refers to. Harakatun refers to the presence of a dhamma, fatha or a kasra. Harakah refers to a dhamma, fatha or a kasra. And normally when we discuss each one of these three, due to having been taught by those who weren't too familiar with the Arabic language and they came from the Asian subcontinent, we normally refer to dhamma through the word pesh, we normally refer to fatha through the word zabar, and we normally refer to a kasra through the word zair. So harakah refers to any of these three. Number one, dhamma, number two, fatha, and number three, kasra. The plural of the word harakah is harakat, harakat. Whilst an individual is reciting the glorious Quran, if he was to change a harakah into another, this will also come under the banner of a major mistake. Let's take an example. An individual's reciting Surah Al-Fatiha and he has the word an'amta. The harakah upon the ta at the end of the word is a fatha. He changes that into a dhamma and he recites an'amtu. Due to the changing of the harakah, this will be termed as a major mistake. And finally, number 5, when an individual changes a harakah into a sukoon or vice versa. When an individual changes a harakah into a sukoon or vice versa. We all know what harakah means now. It refers to either a dhamma, a fatha or a kasra. The new term we have come across is a sukoon. Sukoon refers to the absence of a harakah. Sukoon refers to the absence of a dhamma, fatha or kasra. And one point I'll mention before we continue, many a people become confused in this regard, is what is the difference between a sakin and a sukoon? What is the difference between a jazm and a majzoom? The answer is that sukoon and jazm both refer to the absence of a harakah. Sukoon and jazm both refer to the absence of a dhamma, fatha or a kasra. Whereas sakin and majzoom both refer to that letter which does not have a harakah. So sukoon and jazm refer to the absence of a harakah, whereas sakin and majzoom both refer to the letter which does not have a harakah. So the 5th type of a major mistake was changing a sukoon into a harakah, or changing a harakah into a sukoon. We'll continue with the same example I gave for the last type of mistake. That was an'amta. In this we find the noon has a sukoon above it. The noon is sakina. If an individual was to pronounce a haraka in place of this sukoon, he was either to say an'amta, he was to place a fatha in the place of the sukoon. He was to say ani'amta, replace the sukoon with a kasra, or say anu'amta, replace the sukoon with a dhamma. Due to him changing a sukoon into a haraka, this will be termed a major mistake. And I mentioned vice versa is the same, i.e. an individual changes a haraka into a sukoon. So he's got the word an'amta. It'll be quite difficult to put a sukoon upon any of the letters which have a haraka. Why? Because it is impossible to pronounce two letters which have a sukoon and they come in close proximity or they are attached to each other. For this reason, I'll mention another example. An individual reciting the glorious Quran and he comes to the word yatasa'aloon. Yatasa'aloon. The ta has a fatha above it. If an individual was to replace that fatha with a sukoon and say yatasa'aloon, this will also be termed as a major mistake. Why? Because he is changing a haraka into a sukoon. The conclusion is that when an individual recites the glorious Quran, he can either fall into making major mistakes or minor mistakes. Major mistakes are of 5 types. Number 1, changing a letter into another. Number 2, adding a letter. Number 3, omitting a letter. Number 4, changing a haraka into another. And finally, number 5, changing a haraka into a sukoon or changing a sukoon into a haraka. If an individual engages in any one of these 5 mistakes whilst reciting the glorious Quran, it will be said that this individual has made a major mistake. Making a major mistake whilst reciting the glorious Quran is haram. Thus it is prohibited. An individual should abstain from making all types of mistakes while reciting the glorious Quran. However, once it comes to major mistakes, then he should remain very wary all the time and he should concentrate as much as he can in order to abstain from making major mistakes whilst reciting the glorious Quran. Why? Because it is haram, and anything which is haram, an individual should try his best to abstain from, an individual should try his best to refrain from. Now the question is that we've understood these 5 types of mistakes come under the banner of major mistakes. If an individual is performing salah, whether he's leading or he is performing salah alone, if he was to make a major mistake whilst reciting during prayer, will this nullify his prayer or will it not nullify his prayer? Many people are confused in this regard. Why? Because they will point out certain major mistakes and question the ulama that if such a mistake was to be made during prayer, will it nullify an individual's prayer? It's more than possible, they will say. Yes, other mistakes would, but this mistake will not. The questioner becomes confused that if it does not nullify an individual's prayer, then how is it a major mistake? And on the other hand, at certain times, they go to a scholar and question him. They say, this mistake during prayer, will it nullify an individual's prayer? And upon hearing the answer, they will become very, very confused. Therefore, it's important we understand this point, that once it comes to major mistakes and engaging in them whilst reciting during prayer, every major mistake does not nullify an individual's prayer, even though engaging in every major mistake is prohibited, it is haram. The question then is, which major mistakes will nullify an individual's prayer? And which major mistakes will not nullify an individual's prayer? The answer is that those major mistakes which drastically and dramatically change the meaning of the glorious Quran, engaging in them will lead to the nullification of an individual's prayer. However, if an individual engages in a major mistake, but that does not dramatically or drastically change the meaning of the glorious Quran, even though the mistake is major, even though the individual will become sinful, it will not lead to the nullification of an individual's prayer. And this is the reason for why, once it came to giving examples for the 5 types of major mistakes, I initially gave an example of a major mistake which drastically changes the meaning. I said an individual says kalbun in the place of qalbun. Instead of giving the meaning of heart, he gives the meaning of dog. Thereafter, the examples I gave, the majority of them were such that even though they come under the banner of major mistakes, they don't dramatically change the meaning of that word. Now we continue on to minor mistakes. Al-lahnul khafi. Minor mistakes are those which are a result of an individual overlooking, disregarding those attributes which beautify the pronunciation of letters. Minor mistakes. Minor mistakes are all those mistakes which lead to or which are a result of an individual omitting, overlooking, disregarding those attributes which beautify the pronunciation of letters. Insha'Allah ta'ala, once we continue, maybe not in today's session, but in the next session, we'll come to understand that we've got various types of attributes. We've got various types of qualities once it comes to pronouncing letters in a perfect and in a complete manner. We can divide those attributes and qualities into 2. Some of those qualities and attributes which, if omitted, a letter changed into another letter. I will repeat. One type of attributes are those that once they are omitted, it leads to one letter being pronounced as another letter. And the second type of attributes are such that even if they are omitted, even if they are discarded, disregarded, overlooked, it won't lead to that letter being pronounced as another letter. That letter will remain that letter. However, its pronunciation will be deficient. Let me give an example so we can understand this. And I'll give an example of qualities which we can all relate to, as long as we've studied tajweed a little. However, those people who have not even studied tajweed a little, and it's possible they are learning the science of tajweed for the first time, then they should just make a note here, and later on insha'Allah ta'ala I will mention that once we join the discussion which is coming on that particular day to today's discussion, now you will be able to understand the concept and the example I was presenting. We take the letter ta. We take the letter ta. Within this letter, 2 of the qualities we find are, number 1, itbaq, and number 2, The second quality we find is isti'la. Itbaq means whilst pronouncing the letter ta, the middle of the tongue will be stuck to the hard palate. And isti'la means whilst pronouncing the letter ta, the back of the tongue will be raised towards the soft palate. In easier words, due to the presence of these two qualities, isti'la and itbaq, the back and middle of the tongue will be raised very high. If an individual was to overlook these two qualities and he was to pronounce the letter ta by lowering the back and the middle of the tongue, it will lead to the letter ta becoming the letter ta. So ta will become ta if an individual overlooks the two qualities of itbaq and isti'la. So if an individual was to overlook such qualities which lead to one letter changing into another, this will come under the banner of a major mistake. Why? Because we've studied that changing a letter to another is a major mistake. Changing a letter to another doesn't necessarily mean that in place of one letter we pronounce a totally different letter. No, it's possible that we are unaware of certain attributes and qualities within a letter due to which we overlook them, and due to overlooking them we pronounce the letter ta as the letter ta. So overlooking such qualities, i.e. that once they are omitted it leads to pronouncing a letter as another, such mistakes and omitting such attributes come under the banner of major mistakes. However, if an individual overlooks or disregards, or whilst reciting, a mistake he makes is that he does not consider a quality which further beautifies and adorns the pronunciation of a letter, such a mistake will be termed as a minor mistake. Why? Because this quality does not lead, omitting such a quality does not lead to one letter being pronounced as another letter. Rather, that beauty which should have been present within the pronunciation has slightly decreased. Let me give an example. An individual is to pronounce the lam of the glorious word Allah full mouth, and he ends up pronouncing it empty mouth. So pronouncing a letter full mouth is related to attributes and qualities. It's related to isti'la. It's related to raising the back of the tongue towards the soft palate. If an individual in reality should be pronouncing lam of the glorious word Allah full mouth as huwallahu, huwallahu, and he pronounces this lam of the glorious word Allah empty mouth due to omitting, discarding, disregarding the quality of isti'la, and pronounces it as, recites it as huwallahu, this will not be termed a major mistake, it will be termed a minor mistake. Why? Because he has not turned the letter lam into another letter. Lam is still lam. However, the pronunciation is deficient due to him overlooking an attribute, a quality, which adorns and beautifies the pronunciation of this letter. And other examples which I can give is that an individual overlooks the rules pertaining to ikhfa, he overlooks the rules pertaining to idgham, he overlooks the rules regarding idhar, etc. Making such mistakes, i.e. minor mistakes, is makruh. It is disliked. It is discouraged. However, this does not mean that an individual engages in making such a mistake. It doesn't mean that an individual doesn't take them to be so serious. Why I gave an example, that a major mistake is like a major snake, is like a big snake. Whereas a minor mistake is like a small snake. An individual will not look towards a small snake and think it to be insignificant and go give it a hug or a cuddle. Why? Because he knows that just like a big snake can poison me and lead me to pass away, in a similar manner, a small snake also has the capacity of doing the same. So for this reason, even though we've understood that we've got major mistakes, it is haram to engage in them, thus a person must abstain from them. And on the other hand, we've got minor mistakes. It is makruh, discouraged, disliked to engage in making minor mistakes. Regardless of this, it's still necessary an individual abstains from both types of mistakes. I did indicate towards a third type of a mistake. And because I indicated towards it, I will briefly make mention of it as one of the participants did question with regards to it. I mentioned that a third type of a mistake we can mention is lahn akhfa. Lahn akhfa. In other words, we can say minute mistakes, intricate mistakes, mistakes which are related to the intricate details of the science of tajweed. Now I'll just give an example. I'll mention a couple of terms. Those who are familiar with them, very good. And those who aren't, like I mentioned, they can put a star next to them. Insha'Allah ta'ala, once we study the non-contradictory attributes, I will explain them and then this discussion will make sense. An individual overlooks the quality of takreer, which is present within the letter Ra. An individual overlooks the quality of istitala, which is present in the letter Dad. An individual overlooks the quality of inhiraf, which is present within the two letters Lam and Ra. These qualities I have mentioned, they are linked to intricate details within the science of tajweed. Never mind the normal public, never mind the scholars, even many individuals who are known to recite the Quran in a perfect manner, and they are known to be giants in the science of tajweed, are not fully familiar with regards to the intricate details of these three qualities I have mentioned. The reason for why I normally mention these three types of mistakes is to simplify things for people. I say that once it comes to intricate, detailed mistakes, the third type, it's necessary the Qurra be very particular with regards to them. It's necessary the Qurra, the experts in reciting the glorious Quran, don't engage in such mistakes. When it comes to the second type of a mistake we understood, i.e. minor mistakes, it's necessary alongside the Qurra, the ulama also pay special attention to abstaining from them. And once it comes to the first type of mistakes, i.e. major mistakes, it's necessary the experts, i.e. the Qurra, the ulama, scholars, and the general public abstain from engaging in making any major mistake whilst reciting the glorious Quran. So we can say intricate mistakes, the Qurra deal with them. Minor mistakes, the ulama deal with them. Major mistakes, the public deal with them. This in no manner means that a person from the public should not advance and make efforts to abstain from minor mistakes. This in no manner means that the ulama shouldn't advance and try to abstain from making intricate mistakes whilst reciting the glorious Quran. No, every individual should try to advance. Even people from amongst the public should try to gain that detailed knowledge with regards to tajweed, due to which they abstain from making those intricate mistakes. However, the minimum we can do as the public is that we try to abstain from major mistakes. The ulama at the minimum try to abstain from minor mistakes, and the qurra at the minimum should also try to abstain from intricate mistakes whilst reciting the glorious Quran.